So welcome back to Mathematics in the Inclusive Setting. In this video, we're going to take a look at math in the IEP and what that looks like, primarily around accommodations and modifications, assessment, and IEP goals. So I want to think about some really simple math accommodations. We've talked about what math instruction can look like in the inclusive setting. You've read a lot in your textbook about specific tried and true research-based strategies that you can teach to students. But now when we get into documenting things within the IEP, we need to be really specific when we talk about math instruction and what those accommodations and modifications are going to look like for a student. This ensures that that general education teacher is aware of the accommodations that the student needs. It helps us communicate those requirements. It also helps the student, if they move within that IEP year, that these accommodations and modifications travel with them and ensure some consistency on the services that they're receiving. So there's some really simple things that we can do in math that we can include in the IEP that are really helpful for students that struggle in this content area. One is checking work frequently. And that's something we can include in the accommodations section of the IEP, stating that we're going to check work frequently. That means every 5 or 6 problems, maybe every 10 problems, we're checking the students' work and they don't reach that frustration level of having so many problems to go back and correct if they're struggling. Okay, so they're getting that feedback quickly. Another really simple thing that's helpful is giving them a sticky note with the steps or with the algorithms or whatever they need for that particular math that they're working on. They've just got a really simple reminder that's sitting there on the desk right beside them. We can also have sample problems displayed. So we could have a sample problem on a sticky note if just one student needs that accommodation. Or we could have a sample problem up on the board in the classroom that students can always be referring to help them as they're solving those problems. Reducing the number of problems is a real typical accommodation or modification that we see on IEPs, and it's a good one. You know, we have to really think about what do we need to see to know that the student has mastered that content, and let's keep those problems to a minimum, okay? One that I used a lot when I taught for 5th grade math was using graph paper to help with lines. I found that I had a lot of students with some visual deficits that really affected them being able to complete those computational skills accurately because they would get off on where the numbers lined up. And so just having them use some simple graph paper to write those problems helps them have less errors in computation because it's really lining up the problems correctly for them. You can see the example here. It's real simple, but it's really helpful to students. And that's a great thing to put in the IEP. Then ensures that the classroom teacher is aware and is required to provide those accommodations. Another great one for our students with special needs is using manipulatives. We can use all kinds of things to help students, and this is a great accommodation again to put in the IEP. Having access to coins if they're working on math, being able to have those in their hands, manipulate them as they're solving the problems. Maybe base 10 blocks is something that they need to help them solve some math problems that are related to computation. Okay, so those manipulatives are a really important piece. Highlighting keywords and numbers on word problems is always really helpful. Now we can start out doing that for students as an accommodation, and then we can work to the point where we're teaching them how to read that word problem and highlight those keywords themselves. It's a really important skill for them to have, to be able to do it independently. And then one that's kind of controversial in math is that word calculator. I always love these conversations when we talk about accommodations and when to use a calculator and when not to use a calculator. Okay. In fact, I put an article in the module resources that you can look at and read that's really helpful from LD Online about how calculators can be beneficial. And they provide this really great decision-making flowchart, which I think is awesome even to take into an IEP meeting, because this is a common topic that we talk about in IEPs is calculators. And it just breaks down walking through how do we make the decision of when it's appropriate and when it's not. So look, this says, what's the primary purpose of the activity? Well, if it's to practice computational skills, no calculator, right? The focus is for them to show mastery and show they know how to compute math problems. Okay, so no calculator. Now, what if the primary purpose is to solve problems, explore patterns, conduct investigations, work with real-world data? What do we do then? Then we ask ourselves this question: can the student perform the needed calculations? If it's yes, the calculator can be optional, but it's not recommended. If it's no, that they can't perform the needed calculations, then the calculator is required. I love this because it really breaks it down pretty simply on, okay, what is our end goal? Okay, what are the students working on? And then can they perform that task independently or not? This really helps drive that conversation in a good way instead of taking out what our personal preferences are on using calculators. So I really encourage you to read this article. Really, even K to 12, this can be helpful because we've had this conversation even in IEP meetings last year when my daughter was in first grade, because she really has that one-to-one correspondence issue. So when do we use a calculator with her? So this is a really good tool I think you should take advantage of. The other thing that's helpful is just to have a real handy little facts sheet or numbers facts card or that they can have for addition and subtraction, multiplication, division, that they can reference and refer to as they're working through problems. That can be really helpful. So let's take a look at assessing math skills. There's lots of different ways we can assess math skills. Now, when we looked at reading and writing, there were a lot of norm reference assessments out there that are used frequently. Math does not have as many of those assessments. Now, when you're doing a 3-year reeval or you're doing a screening or you're doing that initial evaluation, a lot of times you may look at the Brigance, and we'll take a look at that here and see if it'll load for me. Let's put it up here. Okay, so this is called the Brigance Comprehensive Inventory of Basic Skills 2 is the current one that's out, okay, and it has assessments in math. And so when we look at math assessment, where is it here? Let's take a look at this. I want you to look at it real quick. Okay. Here we go, math skills, okay? So it looks at numbers and operations, algebra, geometry, measurement, data analysis, probability. So this is a really good, it's aligned to state standards. This is a great assessment to give students that gives you a real clear picture of what they can do, norm reference compared to peers, okay? Now, that is something that we may do on a yearly basis or in every 3 years when we're looking at the 3-year reeval, but how do we assess students on a regular basis? There's some great tools out there, and I am not big on reinventing the wheel. So if I can find a resource out there that someone's already developed that is good, that will help me get to this task of assessment, then I will use it. So I want to show you a couple of these examples of what that looks like. If you're not familiar with Teachers Pay Teachers, which I have a feeling most of you are, it's a really good resource that you can find where teachers have created materials. They sell them online. You can look at all different subject matters, grade levels, different resource types. This is an assessment resource tool for grades 2 through 8. And I like this because you purchase all the assessments. It gives you the data collection material within it. It identifies math interventions. It gives you ideas on grouping students. Just a really good resource. We'll take a look at a couple things here, just so you can kind of see this is what an assessment looks like when students are maybe filling in missing numbers or showing their mastery of base 10 blocks. Okay, got clocks on there. Lots of different testing resources that you can use with this. And the reason I like it is it gives you information for IEPs, but also gives you information for that response to intervention, kind of procedures that we go through and how we can collect assessment data on that. So you can really use it on a variety of students. And it's already created for you. So you're not going out and making those assessments yourself or developing that data collection tool yourself. It's already there for you. $10. I know usually I try to stick with free stuff in here, but $10 isn't too bad for a wide array of assessments. The other one I want to look at is kind of a progress monitoring tool, which I think is really helpful because that's one of the things I kind of struggled with as a special ed teacher, particularly with math, was how did I collect data on a progress monitoring basis where I could show that those objectives were being met or that the objectives were not going to meet them, so we're going to go back and how are we going to revise those goals. But how did I collect that data and have it readily available for me to use? So this is a good progress monitoring for math assessments tool that you can use that I think is really helpful, and I encourage you to take a look at it as well. So let's look at some IEP goals. Now, when we're talking about, in this course, secondary students, we're looking at students all the way from 6th grade to 12th grade into some of those adult learners that are staying until 21. So the IEP goals for math, there's a broad range of skills that we're going to be working on. So I just gave you some examples here, okay? One of the examples is about word problems, and that's an area that our students can really struggle with. So you'll notice as you look at these goals, we have a clearly identified goal with a criterion, with how many times we're going to be giving the assessment, how frequently we're going to be giving the assessment, and if it's on grade level or not. Okay, so let's take a look at the first one. Given grade level, multiple step word problems, the student will use a variety of mathematical strategies to solve the problem with 90% accuracy 3 consecutive times as measured by weekly grade level math assessments. Okay, so here we would be using a weekly formative assessment to evaluate where the student is at on word problems. And for the end of the IEP year, we're going to be looking at accumulation of what kind of accuracy we have on those. The next one is talking about just math problems in terms of a range of ways that those math problems would be presented. So we're looking at patterns, functions, algebraic operations to solve problems with 90% accuracy 3 consecutive times, again measured weekly by those grade level math assessments. I like this idea of these weekly grade level math assessments because it's giving us good formative assessment. It's giving us lots of good data to really chart if students are making progress like we expect. Now here's a simple one for a one-step equation. So here we've got by the date when given a one-step equation. For example, 2x equals 12. With whole numbers, the student will solve for the variable using visual or arithmetic strategies with 80% accuracy. Okay, so this gives us some pretty clear instruction on what's it going to look like when the student solves the problem, how they're going to do it, either with visual or arithmetic strategies, and what kind of accuracy we're looking for, 80% accuracy, okay, for 2 out of 3 sets of problems. I like this as an example because these are also some mathematical computational skills that we see middle school and high school students working on. So this is a real good example of a simple one-step equation IEP goal. Now, I selected a couple of money goals because I think a lot of times when we're working with students in this age range, we will have students who are working on more of those life skill math goals, and money is a really common one that we're working on with students. And the second one I selected primarily because it's really hitting at a skill that students need to be able to count money. So counting by fives is really important, right, when we're counting money, to be able to count nickels. So in this example, students will count by fives to count given amount of nickels with 80% accuracy on 4 out of 5 trials. Okay, so we're really getting at that counting by fives. You could also do this at counting by tens for dimes, counting by 25s for quarters, counting by ones for pennies. You can adjust that goal for all kinds of different types of money. The next one is really good in terms of knowing if a student has enough money to make a purchase. Okay, this is an important life skill, right? So how do we write a goal for that? So here we have, provided with the visual support, the student will use the give to the next dollar strategy in a simulated and real-life situation to determine if he has enough money to purchase an item and exchange money for an item with a minimum assistance given 4 out of 5 opportunities. So that gives us just a good example of a goal for when we're looking at students being able to make a purchase and knowing if they have enough money to do that. Okay, that's a real common skill we work on with students in that life skills math type curriculum. So your next step, of course, in the modules, take a look at the resources that are available. Make sure you read that extra article that is listed in the instructional materials, and then start digging into that case study for math. It's going to be pretty similar to how you did the reading case study. And really look at the resources that are provided depending on what type of deficit you've selected in math. And that will kind of help guide how you complete that case study. Remember, you can always email me if you have any questions.